60 rotten butterflies fluttering about, 70 Miranda flowers singing as they sprout, 80 starry torrents, look how they shine, 90 naginettas stacked in a line. Count, count, count was all she could do, tallying the treasures her adventures accrued.
This isn't helping.
Oh, I'm sorry?
This isn't helping.
I'm afraid there are still signs of frenzy in your body. I know these treatments seem frivolous, but it is advised you try to relax. The nectar blood will take its effect shortly.
Then would you mind just skipping ahead a bit?
As you wish. The warmth was gone, her room wrapped in frost, a sour reminder of the laughter she'd lost. The weight of each treasure now betrayed her health. Such was the fate that she made for herself. All of that counting must be truly exhausting.
That will be all for today. I can feel the nectar advancing. You may take your leave. Number 84, the Noble Sorcerer. The more things change, the more they stay the same. I've seen Soldjars disintegrate into ash and nothingness after being sneezed on by a fire slug. I've seen Miranda Sprout spawn in at the fringe of a boss arena and hug the corner of the wall for 5 minutes while I frantically try to summon something else. But when it comes to the worst, I can't confidently call it a competition. The Noble Sorcerer is an unsalvageable mess of insufferable AI, horrendous damage output, snail-adjacent attack speed, moves with all the urgency of a retired bus driver with 6 kids and a urinary problem, flat out refuses to fight dragons, he belches through his health pool like an old Nissan farts through unleaded fuel, and even the item description has zero faith in the capability of this spirit ash. Generally the strongest indicator of something so far below redemption that it started to mine for redstone. And then they're bold enough to release 1.13, equipping him with slightly stronger kneecaps like that was the one thing he was fucking missing. Number 83, the Miranda Sprout. If the Noble Sorcerer is the bus driver with the 6 kids, then allow me to introduce the kids. Holy shit, summoning these wastes of HP is like running your own babysitting service. They don't fight for you, they don't do anything for you, they just become your responsibility for a few minutes. And if I say you can wait for them to get killed easily to power up the dried bouquet talisman, I'm just gonna have to state that argument for every shitty spirit ash that pops up, so I'm just not gonna use that as a talking point. But if I did, it wouldn't even matter because their low mobility almost always leaves them clumped up in the same spot, rendering them vulnerable to AoE attacks or even a lucky melee string that can just sweep up all of them at once. Utterly pointless since the dried bouquet buff doesn't stack with itself. These little shits can't even die right. If you've ever wanted to experience what it's like to water your neighbor's plants while fighting a dragon, this is the experience for you right here. I'm trying to play the game, not grow a fucking vegetable garden. Number 82, the Glintstone Sorcerer. Instead of explaining what this spirit ash can or can't do and making fun of its overbearingly large amount of weaknesses, I will instead make this section into its own impromptu list. Top 10 ways you can spend 49 FP. Casting Golden Vow, casting Bale's Tyranny, using the Karian Sovereignty skill, building an HP regen strategy, using the Flowerstone Gavel skill and leading it into KLS, using Fire Serpent to proc an enemy dodge and comboing it with Mesmer Orb, 5 Glintstone Nails, 12 Carrion Slicers, turning someone into shredded cheese using Revenger's Blade, literally any healing incantation. Okay, so now that I've thoroughly educated you on the many resourceful means of expending one's FP, you can go forth and teach other people as well, instead of using this summon for a meme run that objectively isn't going to be fun for you or funny to anyone watching it. Number 81, the Winged Misbegotten. This is where I really start raising my eyebrow at 1.13. Will no longer stagger as easily can really just mean anything it wants, and no matter what that upward adjustment may have been, it seems to have completely forgotten about flying spirits and their being privy to showing you their impression of a beached whale after one minor inconvenience. The Winged Misbegotten sucked ass then, and it sucks ass now. Retroactively, this summon is a fumble of mythological proportion, explosion. Like, how did you even fuck up a flying enemy? The Stormhawk and Warhawk summons offer some of the greatest utility despite being relatively weak ashes, and I've seen Yosh clear entire tail swipes from a dragon just by timing his jump correctly. Verticality should be fucking awesome on Spirit Ashes, so what's the deal here exactly? I honestly think if you just raised him up like 3 feet higher, he might actually start being decent. He's not carrying entire boss fights by himself or anything, but when you're this low down, I mean, fuck, anything helps. Number 80, the Soldjars of Fortune. They're just bad. I'm sorry. You aren't even immune to their own explosions, and they're still asking you for a chunk of your HP bar. That's not some glancing blow you're taking either. Like, that shit fucking hurts. Can't make use of Dried Bouquet because they die too quickly and just keep refreshing the buff 1 second after it's already activated. They buckle and give up at the mere mention of anything fire related, zeroing out whatever potential they had against like 70% of the boss roster. And the only fun I've ever really had with them is by swallowing double ruptured tears and racing in to help out their cause. They're horrible when it comes to just about everything, but embarking on such a noble mission makes them cute and adorable, and that means I have to like them no matter what. However, since their explosions do fire damage, you can craft a couple oil pots and time a throw with when one of them explodes to maximize damage. Oil-soaked tier isn't recommended though, since their explosions will damage you too. Number 79, the Spider Scorpion. Do not ever summon this spirit against a field boss because you'll just spend the next 45 seconds looking for it and then finding it trying to beat the shit out of a jellyfish or something. Also, don't ever summon this against dragons or magma worms because it has no evasive tactics or urgency when moving whatsoever. 8 legs and no mobility means if there is a god, then he fucking hates you. It seems to forget about its own ranged attack half the time, and if you're unlucky with spawn points, you could very well be spending minutes of time waiting around until it actually starts producing some value. With all the different creative ways you could proc poison on either a boss or yourself, there's really just no need for a Spirit Ash who has noticeable trouble even paying attention to the goddamn big dude with the big health bar in the center of the room. Number 78, the Page. Mediocrity is this summon's past, present, and future. It was mediocre when the game released, it's only continued to be mediocre since, and his potential for damage, if any at all, is power-bombed through a coffee table by his extremely low HP and that single-shot crossbow that he just shouldn't have. I legitimately can't tell if the item description is even supposed to be a diss or not. Usually these descriptions are pretty good at writing zingers and murdering their own ideas with the written word, but saying nothing is asked of ability, talent, or volition is a roast of solar intensity. If someone hit me with that in 3rd grade, I'd be faking an illness just to get out of school for the next week. I would need a fucking therapist after that line. And somehow it's the most accurate thing I've ever read. No one with any modicum of fighting skill, let alone a sufficient amount of object permanence, would try to shoot their crossbow at something through a brick wall and then turn around and look at me like I'm the one who fucked up. Number 77, the Wandering Nobles. Well, at least there's 5 of them. If they had the urgency to actually disperse a little and not remain super glued to each other's shoulders like a gathering of sorority girls, I might actually consider using this summon as a good setup for the Dried Bouquet. But they all die too quickly and usually in some of the most inconvenient ways possible. They still won't fight dragons, which, I mean, if I'm summoning a pack of hungover uncles with movie prop swords to fight a dragon, I really just have myself to blame there. I guess if managing to keep up with a pair of Albinaurics or one soldier counts as a talent, then I can't say these boys are totally bogus. But I'm gonna be here all goddamn day if I keep excusing bad summons by saying they're good at being meat shields to proc talisman effects. Number 76, the Claymen. Hard to stagger, but hey, they no longer stagger as easily, so that's good news. More fuel for the poise tank. Now let's put that buff on a summon other than the 2 glass bones Andes in the county nursing home and we'll be in business. Give them a stimulant prescription and a kick in the ass and they might even make it to the goddamn boss before they suffer from cardiac arrest. So I guess that means holding aggro is out of the question. You can trigger the effect of Carian Retaliation by parrying their bubble spells at the expense of having to admit to people you just used Carian Retaliation. This is always something that happens with Spirit Ashes. If there's any variety within a single mob whatsoever, this game will go to embarrassing lengths to make sure you end up with the shittiest one. The Page summon can't 3-tap, the Clayman summons can't do that roly-poly shit they do when they need to catch up to something. The Scorpion just develops amnesia and forgets it has a fucking tail or something. I mean, it's not like that utility would have helped, they would have just died quicker, but at least I'd stop feeling like a high school football coach dad trying to push his 300-pound son out of bed. Number 75, the Skeletal Bandit. Whatever it does worse and less consistently than it would if there were 2 of them. Like that's just common sense. That's called math. Any reason you think you have to choose the Bandit over the Militiamen skeletons is either preserved by intense amounts of cope, or you're on your first playthrough and you just don't know the latter exists yet. If it gets 1-tapped by every living organism that knows how to hold a sword, lasting to the end of a boss fight means a total of dick. It's very funny that it happened, but all of its actions during those critical moments still amounts to a totality of dick. And I don't know what kind of sheltered upbringing gave him so much confidence, but this guy rolls around like he's Floyd fucking Mayweather when it comes to picking fights. I think this is the only Spirit Ash I've ever gotten mad at in the same way I'd get mad at another person for not knowing how to play the game. And that self-revive just isn't worth the embarrassment that comes with realizing you're backseating an AI. Number 74, the Nomad. I mean, he's definitely not great, he's not even decent, but I may have given him a little too much grief in the previous list. I forgot to mention that he can be healed using Frenzy Flame Stones. Okay, and now I'm done being nice to the Nomad. Man, I really was just huffing my own farts with all that maybe they'll rework status bullshit from a few months ago. One of you really should have just told me how stupid I sounded. Maybe they'll make madness work in PvE. Seriously, not a single one of you ever told me to just shut the fuck up. The Nomad can't draw aggro, can't keep aggro, and has a ranged attack that can't do damage at range. Sometimes. He'll get lucky every so often and stumble into the exact right spacing he needed to like roast a bird or something, but that's the ceiling for this guy. He might be useful in the Leyndell fight, I don't know, I've never used him there, and that's probably wrong. He's probably not useful there at all. Number 73, the Archers. They do not work well as a squadron from Soft. These nutrient-deficient Doom Eternal assets couldn't hit the ground from a burning building. I've seen enemies staying completely still or just walking calmly in a straight line while I'm holding their attention, and they still can just fire it right over their head. Whatever benefit their frostbite status gives them can easily be found on anything from pots to other weapons to other spirit ashes. Also, that thing in the description about responding to a war cry, yeah, bullshit. The description guy really must think he just gets to write whatever he wants. This is a video game. You're not trying to sell me a fucking Honda. You don't need to bend shit to make me want it more. Just tell me what it does and what it doesn't. Number 72, the Mad Pumpkin Head. On paper, he looks to be one of the best. His helmet grants him immunity to critical shots, blocks well over half the damage of normal enemies and bosses, and potentially way more than that against dragons. Alas, a brick wall is a brick wall, no matter how much HP it has. Thanks, you might as well have given me a solid gold toilet seat. His post-bleed tantrum vastly limits him to enemies and bosses who have great trouble moving around, since you would ideally want his tantrum to be, well, next to an enemy. This used to be dragons and trolls, but after full rounds of patch notes and seeing what the DLC is cooked up, I think trouble moving around refers to an enemy that just doesn't exist in this game anymore. If something can get up to stretch its back, it's too spry for the Mad Pumpkin. Number 71 and 70, the Leyndell and Raya Lucaria Soldiers. Not sure what happened to all the soldier summons here. Some of them are still pretty competent against various different enemies, so I don't know if I want to completely chalk it up to everything just being faster now, but something bad definitely happened. And just in time for the greatsword guy in the Raya Lucaria lineup to finally learn how to use said greatsword instead of throwing salt crystals he bought at the flea market. The Leyndell duo is as cowardly as ever, as they're so good at blocking that their great shields hide entirely from view the giant spear they have in their other hand, leading to them forgetting that they have it. But they occasionally counterattack, which has been helped out a marginal amount by 1.13's blanket buff to Spirit Ash Poise. Personally, I would have granted them both a pair of rocket skates to help out their noticeably vacant sense of urgency, but they can't take all my suggestions, obviously, so I won't hold it against them. Number 69, the Albinauric. If you're looking for niche strategies, wearing the Albinauric mask when summoning this spirit gives you around 20% more resistance against comments and online forums that tell you to look for a therapist because of your personal preferences. Dying while the summons are still active gives you a 30% increased likelihood that you'll eject your head from the crevice of your pimply ass and finally choose another summon. This effect can stack up to 3 times within 10 minutes. If you're looking for actual strategies, 1, choose another summon, and 2, the HP for these summons at plus 10 is just shy of 7,000, significantly higher than what you see on most standard multi-unit summons. You can upgrade them to plus 9 and they still have a larger health pool than most plus 10s of similar FP cost, meaning you can save that great glovewort for a summon with an AI that doesn't make you want to commit a crime. Number 68, Finger Maiden Therolina. Was I too mean to her in the last video? I don't know, I might have been. She gets a little too confused every so often and starts healing statues in the next neighborhood over when you summon her against field bosses, but nothing a nice quartet of thick walls and some common sense won't take care of. However, her healing AI results in you having to play this awkward game of keep away from anyone who gets too aggressive. Sorry, I'm trying to actually fight fuckers, not swat away parasocial fanboys with a slab of cardboard. Heal from afar exists now, so they could have retooled her kit a little and given her a variant of it she can heal you with. Then again, maybe brainstorming shit on a restaurant restaurant napkin without testing it first is probably why we're in this pickle to begin with. You can give her a spell that orders your takeout as an on-kill effect, but it's not going to matter if she belches her entire FP bar down a hole. Number 67, the Manfly. I said I wouldn't use the dried bouquet as a talking point if the summon was bad. I said I wouldn't take into account the fact that all the low HP summons tend to die at around the same time, or at least certainly not within 20 seconds of each other. But if that's literally the only talking point it gives me, then I can't just leave the whole section blank and move on. I mean, I could, but that'd be stupid. It wouldn't make any sense. Magic and fire seem to be their highest elemental negations, so summoning them against Therolina probably isn't a bad idea. Their whole everything else is pretty shit though. And if you're looking for a good status ash, you have plenty to choose from that can all take more of a beating than this one. And that's a bad problem to have when the newer bosses are this aggressive. You'll be lucky if they don't get swatted out the door before they can even fully spawn in. Anything bigger than a squadron of Mesmer soldiers is just way too threatening for them. Number 66, the Haligtree Soldiers. Everything I said in the previous video rings true nonetheless. Exploding at half HP drastically limits the uptime of the summons. They can throw poison pots and open up some synergy with Poison Moth and TPFB, and they tend to hang around each other quite a bit, so stick that dried bouquet back in storage because you ain't gonna be using it here. I vastly prefer these explosions over the Soldjar summon, but even with that gimmick, their greatest utility is still the poison pots, and you've already got plenty of good poison summons to choose from, so just why? Number 65, the Oracle Envoys. Unless all four of them are in full attack mode against a single guy, nothing is ever going to get done. Envoys are a summon that can perform in their ideal environment, but only when the numbers themselves have pretty much already handed the victory to them. They're decent against the Putrescent Knight and Ghost Flame Dragons, but only because they're incredibly weak to holy damage, and their high mobility enables them to run into their bubble spam much more often. If these guys were just a little more aggressive, they might fare better in DLC encounters, but unless I have an emotional attraction to this summon, I'm probably just not gonna use them. Number 64, the Fanged Imps. They're cute, they're vicious. If Elden Ring was made in a slightly different timeline, you'd probably find these guys in a Happy Meal somewhere. Their HP is barely over 3,300 on a +10, but since they're imps, they tend to have decently high damage negation. If you can keep them alive for more than 5 seconds, they can rack up some solid bleed on enemies that are bleedable, but these guys can barely take down a few soldiers, let alone a whole boss by themselves. If they don't have a babysitter constantly watching over them and deflecting attention away from them, and topping them off as often as required, they might as well be using chopsticks for weapons. And at that point, I'd rather just play the game myself than watch two rats with rusty silverware do it for me. Number 63, the Fire Monk. He puts in way too much work for me to call him useless in good conscience, but that damage is just, it's just bad. You could level him to +9 and still get him above 10k HP, and he's aggressive enough to hold some aggro by himself for a good amount of time, but if he gets into scrap with even one Black Knight and you're not there to help him out, he's gone. I guess you can summon him against Fingercreepers to trigger their stun animations, but like, then what? That animation has a cooldown on it, you can't just chain that shit ad nauseum. He's just gonna be fucked again when they get back up. He's just not worth the resources required to keep him alive against pretty much anything outside of the base game. Number 62, the Lone Wolves. They can help out with poise breaking if all three of them are jumping up the ass of the same dude, but groups of enemies can isolate them and take them out pretty easily. This leaves them with their only niche being mid-sized humanoid enemies. They don't seem to have a problem with Gravebirds and Blood Fiends. They can munch up Leonines pretty well. Curse Blades are, they're doable under the right conditions, but if they can't make it flinch, then I'd make a swap to the Bouquet Talisman because they're about to have a really shitty day. Number 61, the Jarwight. The one thing he is fun. He's a party animal. The guy who shows up to your child's birthday party in a clown suit with a liquor flask. And that's because he's just a funny guy. Because laughing is the only natural and correct reaction to watching an AI throw fire pots at a fucking man serpent. He's unreliable, he has zero melee utility, and he always seems to prioritize the one status you aren't wearing a talisman for. But if he's your favorite, then you don't give a shit about anything I just said. That's the strength of the Jarwight. He's the class clown. He sets out to impress nobody, and when he actually does something impressive, it ends up being a nice little treat. A nice little treat that I just wish happened more often, because the AI isn't smart enough to decide which pots not to use against enemies with resistances towards certain damage or status. Number 60, the Gravebird. Wahoo! A Ghost Flame summon. How exciting. Sorry, I'm not good at sounding excited when I'm not excited. He's got good health, good damage negations, and a huge ass bar of stamina that he probably doesn't need, but not staggering as easily means ass and hole when you're a flying summon that must adhere to the in-game rules of physics that say you have to be useless for 5 seconds after getting swatted out of the air. He has a 19-hit slap fight combo you'll never actually see the end of because even with 1.13, his poise never really seems to match his aggression. I have no idea how most of his ranged attacks somehow manage to inch so close to the enemy and still not register as a hit, but I guess 52 FP is kind of a bargain if you want a spiffy lamp to show off to your friends. Number 59, the Spirit Jellyfish. I always get mad at this item description for a really stupid and petty reason, but why are some of these written like they're from a separate character who is also trying to figure out how the game works? It seems her name is Aurelia. The shit is that supposed to mean? That's either what her name is or it's not. We take tutorials from this guy. A little verticality never hurt, but sometimes not hurting things is the problem. This is the drawback most ranged summons tend to suffer from. If anything gets even relatively close to her, she completely forgets about her only good utility and starts slap fighting people. And sometimes that doesn't even need to happen. Sometimes she'll just float up to someone out of her own pre-programmed volition and start treating the boss fight like it's a boxing match. A good way to bring her out of this is to use a ranged build yourself, like spells, smith script weapons, bow builds, anything that doesn't involve being within ASMR range of somebody that allows you to keep aggro while at range, increasing the likelihood of her using her venom spit, which is going to be what you want 100% of the time. Number 58, the Fingercreeper. I, like many of you, had to learn the hard way that its heal doesn't do a shitload of fuck against revenants. If it weren't for that one major setback, I would have fully replaced Therolina with this little back scratcher ages ago, but I'm forced to admit he's not always the better choice. He definitely is most of the time though. He can take a couple punches, he doesn't throw his healing into a shallow lake somewhere, and he actually knows how to stay close to you. Just a little weirded out that the only 2 healing ashes in the whole game both have something to do with fingers. No judgment here. I mean, it's not the worst fetish you could have, I suppose. Number 57, Battle Mage Hugues. Bro just had to pick the 2 slowest sorceries in the whole Raya Lucaria library. Gavel is actually pretty quick when the player and other NPCs use it, I'm guessing because it's factoring the cast speed you get from your dexterity into the equation. But this guy makes some of the best spells in the game seem impractically slow. 1.13 upped his magic damage quite a lot, so I no longer have to repress an urge to Alt F4 out of the game when Cannon of Hema does 210 fucking damage, so it's not like the patch didn't help or anything, but he still struggles to hold his own against recycled enemies and standard boss encounters, player intervention or not. Why doesn't he get a Crystal Spaz 12 like the Twinsage does? That would have been fucking awesome. Oh, because only very experienced sorcerers could learn Crystal... Shut up. Shut your fucking mouth. I've seen demi-humans use this shit. You can't put an intelligence benchmark of 18 on a spell and then tell me only the baddest in the school were capable of using it. If I wanted to waste 122 FP on something, I'd go heal a fucking boulder for 5 minutes. Number 56, the Vulgar Militia. Did you like the Lone Wolves? Would you rather them be just a little slower but with bleed buildup and are somehow even worse when split apart from each other? They're enabled by good tank builds that demand attention, so you can always run a counterattack strategy to help with that, but they have next to no survivability and they can get grilled and smoked by splash damage from AoEs that weren't even meant for them. Might as well just not even consider them for anything DLC related. Come to think of it, as the script is filling out here, I'm beginning to think the whole DLC in and of itself is just a big no-no zone for Spirit Ashes. There are a few exceptions, but there aren't that many. Number 55, the Skeletal Militiamen. They're fine, I guess, but I feel like everyone discovered their immortality gimmick and just started loving them way too much. The introduction of the Dried Bouquet has given them a slight boost in usability since they don't have to completely die for the talisman's effect to activate, but they're only of marginally better service to you when they're actually alive. Neither of them can hold aggro for that long, they constantly run around like they just got out of bed, and that resurrection gimmick is constantly one relatively lucky AoE attack away from not meaning a shit. Is lasting through an entire boss fight really that huge of a benefit if they spend half of that fight trapped in a 10-second long resurrect animation because they tripped over a rock on their way to fight it? Most of the people who like the summon already knew where they were going here, and admittedly that resurrection gimmick is pretty fun and does help with Dried Bouquet quite a bit, but I can't be blamed for looking elsewhere if dying is your biggest talent. Number 54, the Rotten Stray. Won't stagger as easily on the Rotten Stray, has the same energy of won't order a large soda to go with my fat fuck Friday fries. It's a band-aid on a compound fracture. It just doesn't do ass. I'm still willing to keep the good boy somewhere around the middle at least, because the introduction of the poison flower blooms twice ash gives Scarlet Rot builds a reason to get out of bed in the morning. 5800 HP on a plus 10 ain't bad, even if you do need to keep him away from fire most of the time, and he at least approaches threats of even the strongest variety without any trace of panic or fear. One well-placed uplifting aromatic and he'll stay alive exactly long enough to help you proc rot a single time, and if you're summoning this ash, rotting someone up a single time is all he really needs to do. Number 53, the Avionettes. They're squishy as shit, they're unreliable as hell, but I'm just glad someone else is on the receiving end of the spam sandwich for a change. Avionette soldiers need a very specific environment to do well in. They need something that punches them in the face hard enough to trigger their malfunctions, but not to the point where they get mulched by a single combo. Such encounters are, as you would expect, incredibly rare. So your only hope of keeping them alive is to just look for when they start malfunctioning and preemptively prepare a heal, because they absolutely will take damage during their mini bitch fits. Bleed is just about their only utility, but if you're good enough at chasing them and covering up their mistakes with enough heal incantations, you can get a good 2 or 3 procs out of them. Number 52, the Twinsage Sorcerer. He does his best damage when he is in danger. Now, that's a moderately agreeable statement that can be reasonably well argued in the case of any Spirit Ash, but as for the Twinsage, his life is the high life. High on confidence, apparently, because this fragile little sorcerer trots around bosses like a street mime trying to pay rent. And here's the catch. This is exactly where you want him to be, if you want to see anything remarkable from him at all. If there's even a small chance that his next attack lining up in the queue is that riot gun pretending to be a magic spell, then your only priority should be tailing him and shoving uplifting aromatics up his ass until he finally does it. This burns through resources very quickly, since the Twinsage Sorcerer is A, incredibly squishy, and B, a massive piece of shit that doesn't know how his own spells work, thus his placement on the list. Number 51, Fire Knight Queelign. This guy sucks. I mean, like, he doesn't suck, like he's good enough in most situations, but NPC summons make up a large portion of the top shelf nowadays. So how does an NPC summon with a huge thrusting sword and multiple fire incantations end up being mediocre? His HP looks fine too, so I'm not really too sure what the problem. Oh, never mind, his damage negation sucks ass. Really? Not even a tinge of fire resistance here? And why does he take 25% additional lightning damage? Hilda doesn't have to worry about that shit. Lightning is one of her strongest resistances. This just doesn't make any sense. Poor Queelign here has the max HP of a boulder with roids when fully upgraded, but his damage negations are so shit that he gets flattened by everything in his own expansion before I can even point and laugh at his dumbass coconut head haircut. Number 50, the Godrick Soldiers. These guys look like they're about to present the greatest business venture Shark Tank has ever seen. Just Greg and Jim hanging out near the water cooler on their lunch break, crossbow in hand and sword at the ready. Okay sized health bars considering they're just soldiers, and one of them actually does attack with a crossbow at range, which gives them a bit of versatility, but their damage negations are really nothing special. They even take more damage against pierce and lightning attacks. Man, Vike must have made Limgrave look like a fucking daycare center on his way out. Number 49, the Inquisitors. 93 FP comes with a steep expectation, and the Inquisitors, well, they don't exactly meet it, but they do have a few ways of redeeming themselves. One of them can heal you with a Tower Hex, which honestly heals for quite a bit when comparing it to other Spirit Ashes, and the other can boost her attack power of that toy flamethrower she likes using so much. Everything they do I just wish was a tiny bit better, especially for a Spirit Ash I'm not even getting until the absolute last area in the game. I see Inquisitors using tons of different spiral incantations at my own detriment, but I see none of this on the summon. Just a heal and a flamethrower attack that does something, occasionally. The attack buff one of them has doesn't even affect you, it's just for the one unit. Selfish bitch. Number 48, the Demi-Humans. I still love them. I still charge with them right into the battle like I trained them myself, but lord do these guys need some help. The 3 mid-sized units each have 500 base HP, the ringleader with the big club has 711, and their tiny adopted son has 429. Once again, the HP is completely fine, yet the damage negation stats end up posing the biggest problem. 20% extra damage from any elemental type, and the physical negations aren't great either. Using a cursed blood pot can heighten their aggression a little, allowing them to clump together more often so you don't have to worry about anyone wandering out of your heal range. But this also makes them prone to dying very quickly and usually all at once, which minimizes the boost of the dried bouquet. Everything about the demi-humans is a double-edged sword, and not staggering as often doesn't help much when a mere flick on the nose can be enough to kill you. Number 47, the Putrid Corpses. Everyone in the game just hates these motherfuckers. They don't even have to attack half the time. All they need to do is exist within the distance between you and whoever is threatening you, and they just become a problem. Like one of them called Godfrey's mom a bitch under their breath, and he just happened to notice it. The Putrid Corpses offend any and all who glance upon them. Imagine being so ugly and hated that everything who poses the slightest threat to your character is willing to drop everything they're doing and take their childhood trauma out on a few flesh suits. And with over 12,000 HP per unit, some of them might even outlast your ass. Unfortunately, they have a minus 40% damage negation on literally everything, which means that HP pool doesn't do a goddamn thing against late game bosses and pretty much anything in the DLC. Number 46, the Kaiden Sellsword. The Sellsword, I think, is one of those first boyfriend type summons where the only reason you think he's gonna stick around for the rest of your life is because you haven't developed any actual standards yet. You're young and completely ignorant to the many Olegs and Kristovs waiting for you in your late 20s, but the Kaiden Sellsword has a deathcore band with 1,500 local followers, and that's just all you give a shit about right now. With just over 1,000 base HP and barely anything in the damage negation department, he gets chewed up pretty quickly once you take your business beyond Altus. His Warcry only buffs himself, and I get that's how Warcry is supposed to work, but I'm still mad about it because Spirit Ashes are supposed to be supportive in nature. But he can also block shit, and his hyper aggro comes in handy when you need an extra pair of hands for a stance break build. He's perfectly okay, and until you get your hands on a better summon, there's no reason to toss him out just yet. Number 45, the Land Squirts. I have no choice. I love these guys like they're my own 3 adopted sons, but shit's just way too high aggro in the DLC for existing in a space and farting to be your signature fighting style. A little over 10k HP per unit at plus 10 doesn't matter if your mobility is measuring in at a grand total of fuck and all. Our biggest threats are no longer what they were in the yesteryear. Zaymor Knights and Sanguine Nobles are barely discernible potholes in the road now. I'm gonna need some goddamn consistency out of you boys. And dropping anchor in the exact corner of a boss arena where I can't play around you is not how you give me that. The Land Squirts still should be respected for what they are. That poison buildup gets pretty mean when the boss doesn't know how to walk around something, but the war has changed, and so must our arsenal. Number 44, the Marionettes. This summon makes me miss when bosses reacted to projectile spam by dancing around a little like they were putting on a Broadway performance. Most of the DLC bosses show no interest in theatrics or wasting time. They'd much rather just walk right up to you and punch your lights out, and I can't say that's a bad habit to have, but that does unfortunately mean the Marionette summons have little to no extra utility outside of just firing a couple good volleys and then lining themselves up for the spanking machine. Plenty of enemies in the base game could get trapped in a dodge loop thanks to all the arrow spam, making their movements very predictable and easy to cast spells at. Horned warriors, they just don't do that shit. They strap on their rocket skates and donkey kick half your health bar off as soon as they find an opportunity. A style of aggro that Marionettes just can't really contend with. Number 43, the Giant Rats. Rev up that dried bouquet build because these backhand blades haven't eaten in weeks. These guys have their talents, and they have their failings. First things first, 0 FP cost means anything they contribute to any fight at all is still a net positive. So it's a little difficult ranking a Spirit Ash who literally can't fuck something up. I just wish I had a front row seat to said contributions, because I usually don't. I don't because they'll spawn behind a crevice or in a bush somewhere and search for their first victim from there. And I'll just hear fighting noises a minute later when I thought they all wandered off a cliff or something. They can stunlock most humanoid enemies and even smaller bosses like the demi-human swordmasters, but as is the case with most smaller ashes, one lucky AoE and it'll be like Ronnie just never handed you the bell in the first place. Number 42, the Man Serpent. Holy shit, I don't care how fragile he is. And I don't care that he isn't invulnerable to fire like the other. Okay, I do care a little about that because I feel like I got scammed. I'm just thankful we finally got to have one Spirit Ash that isn't the shitty version of a pre-existing enemy. I'm so glad we didn't end up with the curved sword variant. That shit would have sucked so much ass. Zoning is just about this guy's only talent, but it's a talent he performs beautifully. Just wait until he starts revving up his magma shower and run right towards him for cover. And no matter how smart a boss thinks they are, they'll usually follow you right in if they're pissed enough. Could have asked for a little more fire negation, but I guess 20% is fine enough. He shows up to work and does his job, but don't expect him to hold a decent amount of aggro, nor survive if he finds it. Number 41, the Radon Soldiers. These guys are incredibly productive when it comes to humanoid and human-sized enemies. Battle mages, Kindred, Melania, maybe R'Lana with a bit of player intervention. I expected these units to be tankier. However, the Radon Soldier variant actually has the lowest HP of any 2-soldier Spirit Ash. But as long as there isn't a power socket nearby to stick a fork in, you'll honestly never even notice. Their sense of urgency to get shit done is very much something I respect. If they're close enough to something that pisses them off, these psychos will have an attack animation winding up before they've even fully spawned in. They also feel like actual warriors with a generous variety of moves that don't begin and end at shield poking or throwing dollar store mood rocks at people. They end up being one of the best soldier summons just due to their unmitigated testosterone and sense of motivation. Number 40, Depraved Perfumer Carman. Carman, my favorite moral philosophy YouTuber. Giving a Spirit Ash a Crimson Flask sounds like a bad idea on paper, but as it turns out, if you just make his base survivability as low as possible to where he's practically dependent on it, he ends up feeling just fine. His Spark Aromatic can flinch most small enemies, NPC invaders, and other threats no one actually feels that threatened by, but his combat AI is one of the few in the roster that actually feels like it knows what the hell it's doing behind the wheel. When enemies are at mid-range, he throws his perfumes. When they're close, he pulls out his knife, just as expected, which is good. Very good. I know the main benefit everyone talks about is his self-heal, but I think what's more impressive is that this dude just does everything when he's supposed to. And I paid 124 FP for him too, so if I see a single perfume being tossed into a wall, I'm never picking your ass up again. Number 39, the Blood Fiend Hexer. While fighting alongside the Hexer, you have one job, and that is to be his shield of protection, his curtain of defense against gusts of wind somehow strong enough to knock him over. His blood incantations are some of the best and most consistent status and DPS in the game, provided he can actually cast them. It's the closest you'll ever get to having Mog as a spirit summon. He even has his own slightly shittier blood boon he can use for big area damage, and as long as you knock away anyone trying to give him a hard time, he's got passive damage that might actually impress you more than it doesn't. He's got a decent range of attacks and spells, he just needs a little parental supervision so he doesn't get into too much trouble. Number 38, the Kindred of Rot. This summon has a base HP of 1133, clocking in at just under 8500 HP at plus 10, racing past other notable tank ashes like the Crystallion and even Leyndell the Headless. Well, Rusty must have forgotten to take off some mods before he started playing again, because there's no way this tapeworm is tankier than Solid Crystal. And you're correct. About the tankiness, I mean, not the mods. Despite having more HP, the Kindred has almost no negation for any damage type at all, and even takes 20% additional damage from fire. He's pretty spry for a giant bug, and his Pest Threads attack makes him a reasonably decent ranged DPS, but a lot of that tankiness in base game encounters really starts to get shaved off into the DLC. Number 37, Curse Blade Mira. She does inflict bleed. I promise, I've seen her do it. She just needs a little help is all. More or less, Curse Blade Mira is a second Tish without everything that makes Tish good. She's still got the hyper aggression, just without the death debuff, most of the mobility and defense, and I've seen basic rank and file flinch her out of some of her best attacks. How helpful this summon ends up being is determined directly by how aggressive your own playstyle is. If you're power stancing giant 30-pound hellhammers and you'd like nothing more than to take your trauma out on exactly one dude that cut you off in traffic, Mira will be right there with you every step of the way. However, if you're looking for a bleed summon, my only advice there is to stick this weird bitch right back into her Pokemon ball and start looking for something else. Number 36, Dolores the Sleeping Arrow. Miyazaki buffeth and Miyazaki nerfeth away. Spirit Ashes getting indirectly affected by a bunch of weird extenuating variables happens all the time. Poor old Dolores here is but one of many exhibits. She is a wonderful status Ash that applies sleep faster than most actual players with a good sleep build. She's got enough beta blockers loaded in those tranquilizer arrows to put down a fucking whale. But when all the remembrance bosses in the DLC except one are just flat out immune to the status altogether, it's not gonna matter. 5200 HP can get chopped up very quickly in the post game, and against bosses in the second half like Mesmer and Ramina, it honestly just feels like she's flicking rubber bands at the back of someone's head in math class. She's pretty good at taking out red bears though, so no complaints there. Number 35, Clean Rot Knight Finlay. That buff she gives you on startup really ain't too bad. I couldn't bring myself to give a rolling shit about the 7 HP regen per second, but that fire damage negation really pulls some weight against DLC bosses like Bale and Mesmer. It's really the only option you have for a pure fire defense incantation that can cover a group of people, since player incantations distinctly leave out that element for some reason. It feels like she's always just a little more gun-shy than I'd like her to be with those holy rings, but if that was her only ability, I understand perfectly that it would just make her a boring summon. Sadly, her greatest strength is also her downfall. That buff only runs for 30 seconds. Finlay also takes 20% additional damage from fire attacks, so the very second that buff expires, she becomes less useful than biodegradable underwear, with no way for you to reapply the buff since Flame Protect Me only covers the player character. Number 34, the Mausoleum Soldiers. I miss when these guys used to close in on fuckers like a ravenous pack of high school bullies named Jake. Now it's just a demi-human's Ash with a bigger dick. This is where I really started noticing just how short the life expectancy of smaller Ashes became when up against DLC threats. The Revered Spirit Ash can be leveled up to 10, boosting a summon's attack power by 89% and their damage negation by 42.5. This helps out healing incantations a little bit since their damage reduction is what's being increased instead of their health pool, but a little over 40% more punishment from DLC bosses is really not a lot. And on multi-summons like the Mausoleum Soldiers and Demi-Humans, you can barely feel any improvement in their defense. They can still give easily staggerable targets a back alley beatdown, but don't expect them to hang around any longer than a few seconds against Remembrance bosses. Number 33, the Ancestral Follower. DLC enemies close distance like gacha game developers close controversies. Sloppily, aggressively, and usually in no one else's best interest. This makes the Ancestral Follower much harder to stand out and perform than he would in the base game. He's got some combos on him, and 1.13 put a bit more meat on his bones when he's beating someone over the head with that stone spatula, but there's still a very obvious position you would much rather have him in. If he's taking shots at range, you should be up close. If he's forced into melee combos, you should be poking with range spam to get the pressure off of him. Most DLC encounters might require a more dynamic build that has multiple strengths, instead of just tossing him in a corner somewhere and letting him 50 cal someone's face off while you just do whatever. That worked against Estelle, it's not gonna work against Bale. Not the greatest boss summon, less so in the DLC, but if you can lure him into taking out a stray goat during one of the red bear fights and refilling some HP, it could make the difference between life and death. Number 32, Red Mane Knight Oga. Oga is a personal favorite of mine, at least among the Knight type Spirit Ashes, because he's the only one of his ilk that comes with his own ability to follow commands. Using a Warcry or any similar skill triggers his own Warcry that buffs his damage before lining up a modified variant of the Radahn's Rain skill that fires a cascade of gravity arrows in a wide forward traveling area. And I'm pretty sure it works with any roar or cry related skill. I was using Troll's Roar in this footage and it seemed to activate his own cry, no problem. With the right buffs in place, this can easily climb up to around 2,000 damage on dragons and dragon-sized enemies. The wind-up is even delayed enough for you to apply any buffs while he's charging it up, and I've never seen it miss when used for its intended function as a dragon cheese grater. Number 31, Black Knight Commander Andreas. His righteous stand earned him imprisonment in an underground tomb, and once I discovered his much more aggressive counterpart summon, in that tomb is where he's likely gonna stay. I don't just throw around 108 FP for nobody. I better see that hammer doing some work. That great shield is put under more stress carrying his body back to his family than it is actually blocking attacks. That's not a great shield. He's just kind enough to come with his own stretcher after getting the shit beat out of him by standard bosses. He is amazing at drawing aggro away from you, but can't seem to keep it for that long, which is the exact opposite of what I was expecting from a dude carrying around the passenger door of a Subaru. Number 30, the Warhawk. Would you believe me if I told you the Stormhawk actually had significantly more HP than the Warhawk? Yeah, better damage negations too. I thought this was a little weird because this is not at all what's reflected in the params, since the Warhawk base HP is 933, where the Stormhawk base HP is only 711. But I summoned them both and it turns out the plus 10 Warhawk still trails the Stormhawk plus 10 by a good couple thousand. The discrepancy also lies in their mobility. The Stormhawk is better at fulfilling a support role with its damage boost, plus its hyper mobility is able to keep it from taking too many hits. The Warhawk, on the other hand, is designed to be supported, since it has a more diverse library of moves, a fire attack, and spends a lot more time burrowing its knife claws into your enemy's fuck-ugly throat. All of these are equal contributors to the Warhawk's shorter than average lifespan on the battlefield, despite it doing a shitload of work when it's up. Number 29, Fire Knight Hilda. Hilda is extremely far from an all-purpose Ashe. She can't stand on her own two legs half the time when against even small amounts of pressure, and her greatsword feels like it's made of Play-Doh and talcum powder, but her attack variety is usually enough to suppress most of the negatives. Start looking at her like a ranged summon and she becomes reasonably better, usually. I throw a hyperbole at it and say something stupid like tenfold, but it's nowhere near that. Summoning her at a distance and trying to get her to use fire incantations just makes a noticeable damage difference is all. Honestly, the longer that sword stays in its sheath, the better. I would dump on a fucker with Wrath of Gold just to prevent her from getting too close to something and going into melee mode. And if her damage still doesn't feel like it's enough, then, well, nothing a few oil pots won't fix. Number 28, Sword Hand of Night Yolan. Yolan has a very specific perk that almost no one thinks about, which is that her katana, the Sword of Night, is semi-corporeal and cannot be entirely guarded against. This is an absolutely wonderful utility to have against, well, nobody. Nobody at all. Can you think of a single motherfucker in the DLC who fights you with a shield that isn't the Tree Sentinel? And if you can, when was the last time you saw said enemy or boss actually guard with said shield and not use it as a glorified weapon? Yolan is unusually enough not shit when it comes to building up bleed due to her high attack frequency, so I'm not discounting the room she could open up for status builds, but I don't know how else to say how underwhelmed I am by the attack power and aggression of this summon. A full point-blank Witching Hour slash could barely hand out 200 damage on a +10, and when searching for what other people thought about this summon, the most notable comment I kept running into was how you were supposed to use this Spirit Ashe and obtain the duo variant with her sister Anna, which I think is just about the closest thing to a death sentence you can give any summon. But it's an NPC summon, so it's still, like, it can't be bad. It's very difficult for NPC summons to be even mediocre, especially if they have a status build-up. Number 27, Nefeli Lu. Betrayed by her pure heart? Motherfucker, she was betrayed by my ass, okay? The writer of the item description didn't hand her the fucking potion. Let me take responsibility for my own bastardliness. You open up the avenue for me to even do it to begin with, and then you try to give me an easy deflect? Fucking pure heart. Be fucked. Nefeli was one of the select few who successfully evacuated the town before the deadly tropical storm Won't Stagger swept away countless lives. As a reward, she was given slightly increased vigor and strength, and nothing else. Just don't even bother taking her into the DLC. It's not worth it. If you actually manage to stomach the whole questline required to get the summon in the first place, you're just gonna feel like an even bigger piece of shit watching her tits get pretzel knotted by a giant hippo. The Ashe is an NPC, and that comes with a pretty long library of attacks she has access to as an NPC Spirit Ashe, but 11k HP on a +10 really just doesn't go that far when your damage negations are solid zeros across the board. Number 26, the Night Maiden and Swordstress. They can still swarm a dude like a pair of velociraptors, just their teeth and claws have been slightly sanded down is all. They've been child-proofed, so to speak. They can still solo weaker DLC bosses like the Dragon Man and even Death Knights on particularly lucky days, but they can't fire on all cylinders all the time. Consistently, what you get out of these ladies is a pair of fairly diversified movesets that hand out just enough damage to be significant and absolutely not a single digit more. They're the type of summons you need to fight with for them to adequately work. Their HP isn't that imposing, even on a +10, but their base stamina ends up being around 200. This is what enables them to constantly hop and skip around like they normally do. And if you can get past the Night Maiden occasionally turning and firing her Night Mist right into the suburbs of Nothingville, they end up being pretty capable most of the time. Number 25, the Mesmer Soldiers. Do you wish the Godrick Soldiers gave their balls a tug and stopped giving a shit about any sense of their own preservation? Are you growing tired of the Radahn Soldiers exercising their oppressive monopoly over other low-cost two-soldier summons? The answer to that question for me and for you is no, you aren't, because with the introduction of the Mesmer Soldiers, such is no longer true. They each have their own signature charge attacks after a war cry, allowing them to do this really cool thing where they walk forward very intensely and no one can stop them. They just have all the best attributes of all the other soldier Ashes. They fight with the same testosterone of the Radahn summons, they can tank hits like the Leyndell summons, knock shit over like the Mausoleum summons, but they had to be scaled for post-game content, making them an objective and direct upgrade to any soldiers you used before. NPC bosses will never bother you ever again because these guys are going to be too busy using the boss's head as a paint roller to color the wall they're up against. Number 24, the Azula Beastmen. Do you like single unit summons like the Warhawk or the Sellsword? Don't you wish the game would just give you two of them for no good reason and just toss their balancing strategy right into an industrial grade log cutter? Well, if you do wish for that, you'd be pretty shitty at wishing for things, because that's something you already have. This Spirit Ashe could have functioned well enough on its own just as a single unit, and I still cannot think of a single reason why in this one specific instance they just decided to give us two, but I've learned not to make a big deal out of shit and not question things I feel like I deserve. And I feel like we deserve of these. At plus 10, their HP is a big ol' who gives a shit, cause when you summon a pair of hyper-aggressive velociraptors practicing their MMA routines, your only concern should be to jump right in there with them and enable their 27 hit combos as much as you possibly can. Actually, fuck the velociraptor comparison. This is like summoning a pair of sentient weed whackers. This is what the Avionette summons would be if their malfunction modes just never turned off. Their aggression can easily match and even surpass most of what's in the DLC, and I take them hippo hunting with me any day of the week. Number 23, Bloodhound Knight Flow. Keep him away from lightning and he'll pretty much play the game for you. Sometimes. Of all the base game summons, I think 1.13 gave Flow here the biggest makeover. Only 657 base HP doesn't do too much work, no matter how light on your feet you are, but the increased physical damage negation is really something you feel when you see him fight bosses. Being harder to stagger also increases his attack frequency quite a bit, which turns him into a pretty capable status summon, even if his actual damage output doesn't seem to be affected that much. Large AoEs and elemental attacks can still put him on his ass pretty quickly though, so I'd keep him away from Tower Priests and Fire Knights. And Bale, I guess. I mean, Bale versus anything is already a bad idea in and of itself, but that boss is like the perfect storm of shit that Flo just can't deal with. Number 22, Black Knight Captain Hugh. The Captain Spirit Ash displays a charcuterie board of delicious talents and little utilities that help him out a large sum in any fight. While Hugh has amazing verticality and defensive power with his Wings Ash, while his less talented brother keeps himself stapled to the ground still trying to figure out how shields work. He's likely to get himself killed a little quicker due to his high aggression, but he seems to consistently pull more weight than Andreas no matter the situation. FromSoft has had noticeable difficulty when it comes to writing good AI for characters with shields, and despite my love and passion for backseat game designing, I just can't think of a single solution for this. I can barely write shit for my own mods without the non-zero chance of throwing everything into disrepair, but I do know that whenever a summon has a shield, he probably won't be doing a lot. Number 21, Latenna. Okay, so Latenna is still very good, but that unfortunately now comes with a few conditions. DLC bosses, as most of us probably know by now, are an entirely different breed. They hit harder, they take punches like a tree trunk, and Inner Elim is literally built to be twice as hard as the highest scaling of the base game. Latenna has 3,900 HP at plus 10. So yeah, that's not gonna work. In the base game, Latenna enabled a particularly fun playstyle that turned most boss battles into a high-stakes game of hot potato, where you both competed to see who could keep the attention on them for longer. Only now in the DLC, that hot potato has been replaced with a cinder block. If you loosen the leash on even a weaker boss and allow them anywhere near Latenna's location for more than a couple seconds, it's just fucking over. Like, she's just dead. You failed. And taking 40% additional damage from holy attacks means summoning her in the second phase of the Radahn fight practically turns your efforts into a babysitting service. If you're really just that dedicated to keeping her alive, I'm sure Latenna can still work, but being physically rooted to a single spot is nothing short of corporal punishment. Number 20 and number 19, Banished Knights Ingval and Oleg. You know, this really used to be a pretty easy decision for me. Back when we were still arguing about when we thought Waves of Darkness was finally gonna get fixed, Oleg felt like the favorable pick in just about any context. His aggression rivaled that of sex-starved college football players, which really did a good job enabling caster builds, and he was so nimble and light on his feet that if he saw you having trouble with anything, he would literally just rev himself up and spin his way back to you and slap the living shit out of anything that tried to invade your safe space. Yet, it turns out that all Ingval really needed to perform was a couple weeks at the gym, just a little help with the staggering, and now he feels like a completely different summon to the point where I honestly don't know who I would pick over the other. So my only solution to this problem is to just say, fuck it, they're both good, try them both out, try at least one of them. You'll be pleasantly surprised. Number 18, Perfumer Trisha. If you can keep her alive, she'll keep you alive. Having a free bubble aromatic ready to go every 30-ish seconds means she outlives a majority of her competition, despite being an incredibly squishy summon that's entirely dependent on whether or not you stick with her. And sometimes that won't even help. 6,200 HP does not last long, even relatively, anchoring almost all of her survivability around her AI and how often she decides to toss out her bubble. And the longer her uptime, the more likely she is to do it. There you go. Math doesn't get much simpler than that. That one utility is such an invaluable asset to have that you should be extorting that shit every second you're physically able to. This is doubly important since Arturia leaves are in limited supply if you don't want to roll over saves, but I guess Trisha, the master couponer over here, invaded every single Limgrave Costco she could find and swept out the entire stock before we even start the fucking game. If you're out of uplifting aromatics, just summon Trisha. She'll take care of it. Number 17, Demi-Human Swordsman Yosh. 16,000 1000 HP. On this little twerp? Short king, tall presence. If he doesn't impress you, it's because you just can't see him, because he's currently over your head, and he's about to kill you. I can complain about him staggering easily and having to pick himself up off the ground after a small hit, but I mean, look at him. Dude could get flinched by jump scare TikTok videos, let alone a hammer. But those verticals can clear right over most attacks from mid-sized enemies. You can get him as early as the Bellerot jail, and he makes anyone in the base game look like a toddler with a pair of peanut butter jars stuck to their hands. You may need to intervene every so often if he gets caught by a lucky attack string, and Anza's Judgment Cut End seems to be sorely lacking from his moveset, so I'm not sure how this Ashe was supposed to be this goober's apprentice, but he dances around like a Nightjar ninja so much, I'm surprised I haven't seen a boss tie themselves in a knot like something in a fucking Tom and Jerry episode. Number 16, the Crystallian. Where's the item description that vaguely alludes to a god and his consort getting the shit kicked out of them by a blueberry lollipop? 350 poise, for the love of God. What does poise even mean anymore? You can poke him, you can prod him, slash at him, kick him in his twin moons, and he'll just keep on spinning and throwing fine china at you until you eventually give up and die. Or just like get bored and leave or something. His damage is some of the worst I've seen on any Spirit Ashe, and bad damage is an incredibly competitive category to participate in. However, his strength lies not in his sword, but in his stoicism and his firm and unwavering set of blue kneecaps. These twiggy, translucent legs could hoist the curtain walls of a military base. He's the last one to arrive in battle, and he will make sure he's the last one to die. It's not a matter of whether or not he will outlast you, it's only a matter of how. Number 15, Stormhawk Denny's. Stormhawk Denny's. His buff duration has now been upped to a full minute, which means Rallying Standard can officially get two things. 1, bent. 2, the fuck over itself. This is the only aura buff you'll ever need anywhere in the game. Keep in mind, Golden Vow is 47 FP, the exact same cost of this summon, and that shit only ups everything by 15%. If the Stormhawk self-destructed immediately upon casting the buff, it would still have more significant contributions than over half the summons available, and offer reasonable competition to what's probably the most popular buffing incantation. Its high mobility can draw just enough aggro away from you to still feel like it's helping, but not too much, and it's really good at making you feel like you're doing all the work, even though that sentiment is never less than 20% false at any given time. Also, 47 FP is just like really, it's just cheap as fuck for a summon. Like at that point, if I've never used a summon before, that would still be enough to just make me curious at least. Number 14, Leyndell the Headless. Aggression is a valuable asset to have in the DLC. This is not one of Leyndell's strongest talents. Leyndell likes hanging back and drawing whatever fire she can away from you by pelting her foes with Death Blight lances, and the distance on her throws is honestly pretty amazing, and seeing her Peyton Manning a spear into a dragon's mouth from halfway across the jagged peak certainly makes her pretty well built for drawing aggro. I really don't know why this doesn't happen as often with DLC encounters. My running theory is that the health pools of what you're fighting are just so tremendously wide that she can't consistently hand out enough damage to warrant a double take from most bosses. She does have two means of defense though, which is her teleport and her shield, meaning she'll almost definitely outlive you in pretty much any situation, healing or not. Number 13, Black Flame Monk Amon. What do you mean Midra has 45,000 HP? We should do something about that. No, don't worry about the fire resistance, I've got that covered. This guy meshes beautifully with the 1.13 adjustments. Less flinchability means more fire incantations, and more frequently he actually gets to use that CGS of his, because god fucking damn it, his viability as a summon is entirely dependent on whether or not he's in the mood to unsheath that serrated steel bellend of his. His Scouring Black Flame incantation is a good second place contender, but nothing will ever cause more trouble than that motorized vegetable chopper he has attached to that sword. If this was all he fought with, it might make him the greatest attack summon in the game. Number 12, the Great Shield Soldiers. Yep. Still good. Not as good as before, but still good. Not the best summon against R'hllana, surprisingly, since her high mobility allows her to just Omaiwa Motion Deru herself behind them and take them out from there. But against pretty much anything else, it's like constantly having a brick wall between you and the boss at all times. Pretty handy. Each of them have 90 guard absorption and 160 base stamina, enabling them to stand and guard for a fuckload of a long time, is what that means. Any boss with all of their offense in the front will never stand a fraction of a chance. Malenia can't hang, Loretta can't hang, Mesmer and Gaius both get decently manhandled by them. As long as they aren't at risk of a stray stalactite impaling the tops of their heads, or I guess a ground mole or something, then they'll fare just fine. Number 11, Omen Killer Rollo, what are you doing down here, bro? What the fuck happened? I had to summon him against Melania just to double check myself and make sure I wasn't accidentally invoking Rollo's clinically depressed cousin. Against DLC bosses, his attack pattern is going to be the one thing that decides how long he's going to live. He can still turn standard enemies and small bosses into a waffle with those cleavers, but it feels like he does so much less consistently. He can keep the aggro for as long as he needs to, but as soon as he starts belching fire everywhere and stumbling backwards like a drunk sumo wrestler, he might as well just be dead. His elemental damage negation actually ain't too bad, and the 40% fire damage reduction does give him a small edge against Mesmer. If you're good enough with the heals, he might even make it to his second phase. Number 10, Telu the Golem Smith. You might as well be invoking the aid of a giant concrete wall, and sometimes that's exactly what the situation calls for. Not every skirmish needs to be handled by being proactive. Telu is about locking down a space, keeping it safe, and letting the opposition fuck around and find out when it's ready. His base HP is only 392, giving him the single lowest health pool of any DLC Spirit Ash, including the Manflies, but as it turns out, the innate damage reduction that comes with being a fucking boulder is pretty nice. He can take twice as much punishment as other DLC Ashes, but the low health pool makes healing spells and regen builds that much more efficient. His damage doesn't nearly compare with what it used to be pre 1.13, but if the only thing we're throwing a fit about is that he no longer bends Radon over his knee and paddles him like a Penn State fraternity officer, then we need to just admit he's in a decent spot. Number 9, the Big Mouth Imp. One of the most fearsome names in the base game. Peerless in skill, unrivaled by anyone else in the lore, soloed by a fucking lawn ornament. I think most people already know why this one is good, but I'm just going to reiterate a few pointers for the back of the class. Only costs 50 FP, can infinitely stunlock human-sized enemies like Zaymore Knights, Alabaster Lords, and Melania, can also stunlock bigger bosses like Tree Sentinels and bosses with perceived immunity to knockback like Tibia Mariners, shitload of damage negation because he's an imp, some other fifth point that I can't think of, I don't know, just jot something down here, who cares. This little imp could launch its own space program with all the times I've seen this guy threaten to send dudes 5 times my size into orbit. Number 8, Black Knife Tish. Okay, guys, I think Tish is getting a little tired of this shit. Think of all the medical bills she has to pay as a result of carrying half the community on her goddamn back. Of course she's not as strong as she used to be. She's got like retirement plans and shit to think about. Her and Rollo can still tap dance around anyone they want to in the base game, but Tish's lack of HP really pushes her down a few notches in the DLC. Just about every other named summon in the post-game surpasses her by a wide margin. The debuff on her weapon is still really nice, and perhaps even more valuable later on since most of the post-game bosses have just finished munching on an HP BLT for breakfast, but don't expect her to last any significant length of time during Radon or anything. Number 7, Ancient Dragon Knight Kristov. Pair him up with Flowerstone Gavel and nothing can stop him. Well, a couple things. Quite a few things can still stop him, actually. Even among his knightly co-workers, Kristov has an absurdly high health pool and extremely high elemental damage negations after 1.13, which gives him plenty of room to play around with in the post-game. He bodied Godfroy's counterfeit ass in the lore, but can't seem to accomplish even close to that in-game, probably because you can't actually summon in Everjails, and I'm a dirty, sneaky, cheaty boy. He was already an M1 Abrams of a Spirit Ash, but giving his targets a healthy dose of Flower Dragon Bolt turns that partisan of his into an engine of massacre. I didn't notice this immediately, but he also has a much higher maximum stamina than most other spirits of the same caliber. This guy spams thunderbolts like he's an actual invader in someone else's game. Tish has her own level of impressive. The tier is obviously dumb, but I don't think I've ever seen a summon solo a boss just by DDoSing a bitch with 19 casts of the same goddamn move. Kristov is the only Ash who can make that happen. And the Big Mouth Imp, I guess, but it doesn't look as cool. Number 6, Divine Bird Warrior Ornus. Everyone, I present to you your new favorite carry summon. Ornus has a little bit of everything. He can jump and hop over attacks, he can grab NPCs, he can shrug off an oversized hammer to the face like a bug bite, and he's just a flying TMP that shoots giant feathers and kicks shit over and occasionally uses his actual swords when he remembers to. I don't think I'll ever use another knight summon again. Ornus has taken me under his sweaty, battle-hardened armpit and shown me a new religion. Fuck birds and fuck knights. Now, you can just have both of these in a single Spirit Ash. His health pool is really his only glaring problem, and I can't even confidently call it a problem, because the fact that he's this far up on apparently everyone's lists and can still mulch entire bosses by himself means his health is probably exactly where it needs to be. He's one healthy breakfast away from being the dominant life form on this planet. Number 5. Ancient Dragon Florisax. Despite having a lightning debuff available, Florisax is incredibly weak against lightning attacks, taking 25% more lightning damage than she would from any other element or subtype. Her Flowerstone Gavel works exactly the same as yours does. Anyone getting hit by its weapon skill still takes 23% more lightning damage for 20 seconds, 30% if she can charge it. If you keep her alive for any longer than the amount of time I've been talking in this paragraph, shut down Nexus for a while because you've probably modded something without realizing it. Either that or you've figured out the only objectively correct approach to fighting with this summon. Grab a Death Knight axe, grab your KLS and your Lightning Shrouding Tier, and just start manhandling your controller like it's a boppet. Ditch the Great Shield, ditch the fortification buffs, just unbind your dodge button. Who gives a shit? You won't need it for what we're doing. If she needs cover for a buff, you should be throwing a Lightning Spear. If she's charging up her Gavel, you should be throwing a Lightning Spear. If her Claw comes out, you should be throwing a Lightning Spear. If at any point in time this summon is out and you aren't in the middle of an attack animation of some kind, you're just fucking something up. Number 4. The Horned Warrior. Hulk smash motherfucker. This guy just doesn't move. He's what the Great Shield Soldiers would be if they were 3 times as tall and actually took those noodle arms of theirs to the gym. If he ever starts a combo or an attack, you can bet on the sun rising tomorrow that he will fucking finish it. He makes your ass feel like the summon. He will instantly aggro on anything that gets near you and just become the main character of the game for a couple minutes. He knocks over Crucible Knights, he takes Melania behind the Applebee's, and his horn calling skill can even inflict bleed just like the enemy variant. He's the one single instance where we aren't given some watered down elementary school bully version of the real enemy. Like, we just get the guy. This is his game, we're just renting it for the week. Number 3, the Dung Eater. I'm really not shocked at all that NPC summons comprise the top 3, but I am stupefied that one of them just happened to be the Dung Eater. In fact, he seems to be in the best shape of his life. He can wrestle with post-game content just like most of the post-game summons, and he's the one base game Puppet Ash who can still take down significant bosses in the DLC by himself. His vast range of utility just gives him a chance against anything. Shriek of Milos, the bleed on his greatsword, the ranged poopy Rancor consumable, the poise of Mr. X from Resident Evil. He was one of the only summons that managed to last against Bale all the way to the end of the fight. If you throw him at something and you still can't kill it, then I'm sorry, you just suck. I don't make the rules, I'm just a messenger. Number 2, Yolan and Ana. What's better than one Mimic tier? 2 of them. Fucking 2 of them, each with their own dedicated bleed build. Arm yourself with the Obsidian Lamina and turn everything into dingy, lacerated cheese. Shit, could've sworn there was a godskin here a second ago, what happened? There is an unquantifiably long list of unhealthy pastimes people use to cope with the eventual embrace of death. Anything from donuts to dextroamphetamines, but I come bearing a new addiction, and that is sitting back with your favorite resting emote and just watching these queens have themselves a fucking party, inflicting painful death on anyone who dares ask for it. Yola and Ana are the summon. They're just the only summon you'll ever need to worry about. They carry beautifully into New Game Plus cycles due to their amount of status buildup, and with 2 separate NPC summons in play at once, the boss will barely even see you pass through the fog gate. Going to Raboth's Rise is 100% worth it just for the Spirit Ash, and that should be your top priority as soon as it's open. Number 1, the Mimic tier.
Looking good, baby!